Hey everybody. One quick note before starting today's episode. This week's 5-star review, written by Yeah Morgan, titled Love. Yeah Morgan says, Love, love, love. 10 out of 10. Would recommend. Thank you so much for your support, Yeah Morgan. And to everybody else, thanks for listening. And thanks for all the emails. Here's today's show. I hope you enjoy.
I always felt strange as a kid. I used to take apart my toys and I'd pull the wire out of the electric motors and then I would wrap them into different shapes. And I would sit there and just stare at them, and I could swear I could almost see something happening inside the wire. Since the age of about 5, I did not believe in reality. I actually started cutting myself as a child when I was about 5 years old. And there was nothing, terrible that happened to me as an infant or a kid. I just didn't want to be a part of this world. I always believed in magic. I always knew there was more to this world, and I felt kind of ripped off being in this world. As crazy as that sounds to say out loud.
Psychotropic presents Max. What was your first psychedelic experience?
First psychedelic experience would be, externally would have been with DXM in Robitussin, and that was about halfway through high school. One of the kids in one of my classes had access to pure DXM in a capsule. And so I took that with a few friends, and we had quite a few experiences. And just to kind of backtrack, the reason I say externally is because I used to have these nightmares as a kid where I thought it was screaming, and those dreams, it was a recurring dream where it would wake me up and I'd fall asleep, and it would come back. And then I didn't know until I tried DMT, 5-MeO DMT years later, where what I thought was screaming, I was actually hearing DMT release in my brain, that high frequency. And so these nightmares I had since a kid were actually dreams that were initiated from the DMT release in your brain. But the first time I did psychedelics was in high school with 2 good friends. And I started smoking marijuana in middle school, but never really had a crazy experience until we got involved with DXM. The bottle of Robitussin, when people drink it, has 384 milligrams. And the pure DXM we were in the capsules, we were doing 500 milligrams, which is huge, especially for our body weight, being in high school, being, in shape. And the first memorable experience I remember was Rockefeller Skank. The music video was on MTV, and when they did that, it was right about now, the Funk Soul Brother, and they flipped the coin in the air, and the camera's cutting back, jump cuts back and forth, and we all just like lost our fucking minds. It was like, holy shit, this is insane. And it was on DXM that we actually had ever witnessed, well, I guess it would be for all of us, had witnessed our first shared hallucination between three people. We were tripping pretty good and smoking some weed. And my friend's cat runs into the room. The way his furniture was set up, he had a set of drawers and another cabinet with a little space for the corner, because that's where the vent was for the heat to come up from the basement. And there was no way out of there. And we watched the cat run through the room and go into the corner, and we all go to look like, what the fuck's wrong with the cat? And the cat, there was no cat. But we all saw it. And the same night, because I got the most allowance, so I was the one who paid to buy cigarettes, and we'd always share a cigarette. And I pull out a Camel White, and I like to puff them, kind of like when people light cigars, and let keep the flame on and puff it, and let the flame kind of pulse a little bit. And I had done that and taken a drag, and I handed it to my buddy, and he couldn't get a drag, and we looked at the cigarette. The cigarette was never even lit. So we had two shared hallucinations on our first trip. And that's really what catapulted me into wanting to experience more and know more, and trying to understand what's going on. We did, DXM, regularly until about a year after that. I got a chance to do mushrooms. And I did a combination of DXM with mushrooms. And that's when I first had I'm not sure exactly the word for it, but more of a hallucinating feelings of touch. I went with a buddy over to another friend's house and watched some really shitty movie. And the peak started coming on. And they had rolled a joint and sealed it with honey, because that was the thing to do for some people, I guess. And I remember I was taking a hit of the joint, and I passed it, and I had some honey on my fingers that flakes of marijuana were stuck to, and I rubbed it off, but then I started hallucinating that everything I touched was covered in honey and flakes. And on DXM, I never really had, besides us seeing those two other things, I never really had hallucinations as far as seeing things that weren't, or as full of a hallucination. And, at this place where we were smoking the joint, I had to go to the bathroom, and I started to notice textures on things. This was still in high school, and I went to go wash my hands after taking a piss, and I looked at my face in the mirror, and it was actually like the movie Poltergeist. I stared at my face, and I just watched the skin age, and then wilt, and then decay and fall off. I saw myself as a skeleton, and it didn't scare me. It was pretty fascinating. On the senior year of high school is when I moved out of town, and I met a new group of friends, and I had brought the information of DXM with me. And so I started, and I actually spent the first half of my senior year completely alone. I was always a shy, low self-esteem person, and I was not one to make friends. And this kid invited me to a house party, and so I show up to the house party, and there was a group of people there that are now my friends, and they recalled seeing me come in, and I was glowing. I had this like huge yellow aura. They were all on shrooms, and they saw me come in just with this huge, like big circle of light around me, and they talked amongst each other, and like, we got to get to know this guy. Like, something's weird about this guy. And I became friends with them, and we started doing DXM together. And one night, we were all tripping and surfing the internet back when it was still dial-up. And one of them had come across stories of people talking about this drug called DMT. And that had gotten completely lost and just forgotten for about 7 years after that, before I came back to wanting to know more about DMT, and in between then had more mushroom trips, plenty of DXM experiences, probably too many. One of the friends I had met at that house party, we actually did DXM probably too much. But one weird thing that did happen is that we became telepathic with each other. There was one night he asked me, like, what am I thinking? And it was, I can't remember exactly what it was. It was something stupid like a toaster. And he was kind of blown away, and he asked me, what am I thinking now? And we did this like a handful of times. About 7 years after that point, that I had remembered what we looked on the internet and decided to get into sourcing DMT. The first time I had actually ordered a toad off the internet. He arrived in a box, beat up, and I had milked this glands only a couple times. I only had one 5-MeO experience, and I just didn't feel good doing that to another living being. And so I had seen what I did not know as my neighbors I had recognized from a pet store. They were walking down the street, and I called them out, and I told them I wanted to donate the toad to their business. I didn't, have time and energy to take care of this toad, and so I had used it for that experience. And after that is I did some research online and ordered my own rip arc and did my own extractions after that. And that the first time that I remember that first DMT hit was, I was just blown away. I was shot into, I wouldn't say shot into, like, it's weird. People talk about tunnels. I never saw tunnels. Reality just changes in front of me. There's just a transition. It's like putting on your glasses or taking off sunglasses. And there was these revolving shapes in front of me, but they were also at the same time like little men. And they were just spinning, and they were working, and they were communicating to me that they exist to work, and they work to exist, and the existence they create is the existence for everyone, and that's their purpose. They just keep working to live and living to work, and creating reality as we know it. And it was so real. I could not believe it. It had just completely blown my mind.
Was it kind of a grid pattern, or were you in another universe?
I was in another universe. Like grids. I've never seen grids. The closest thing to any kind of grid I would say I've ever seen was on DXM and mushrooms, where everything starts to pixelate. Reality pixelates. But as far as DMT, I wouldn't call it a grid. There is a place over time that I've kind of gone to, and I repetitively quite often go back there when I get deep enough. It's it's not as geometric as it is free flowing. There is geometry, but it's not rigid structure. It's more circular, organic shapes. Definitely vividly, brightly colored, and it emits a sound. It doesn't come from my head; it comes from the visual source, and it is kind of like the afterlife. A cliche word would be like heaven. It's some realm, and it's a repetitive place I've gone to that has its own very distinct shape to it, and unfortunately, it's not something I can bring back and draw. My ultimate goal would be to meet someone with an eidetic memory or a photographic memory who could do DMT and draw it. That would be pretty amazing to have someone who could bring that memory back, because it seems with DMT that you have the great forgetting or it's just a hard dimension where you're not able, like a cube creates a shadow of, a two-dimensional square, and our three-dimensional reality, is a shadow of a fourth dimensional reality, and whatever you see in the fourth dimensional reality it's not something it doesn't seem that your brain can hold it to bring it back to process it with the three-dimensional mind. I had purchased the mind lamp from Styleron, which was a project at Princeton University with random event generators researching global consciousness project. And it's a color changing lamp that you should be able to change colors with conscious intention. And I had that on a lot, with different girlfriends and whatnot. If we were, having intimate moments, the lamp would turn red. And every time I would do DMT, it would be either yellow, which was, the color of the aura that people saw me have, or it would be white, which white is not a color that is programmed for that lamp to do randomly. Random event generators, I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but they do a countless numbers of coin tosses every second. And if there's no outside input, then it should just be 50-50, and that means it cycles through one color at a time through a loop, and white is not an option unless there's an extreme deviation from baseline. And so friends and I would experiment with that in different psychedelic settings, which confirmed to me the human aura electromagnetic field that extends beyond the human body. If you go into a room where people are fighting, like they say you can cut the ear with a knife. And that got me into researching consciousness, because it absolutely extends beyond the human brain. And there are people who might try and argue that, but science is proving more and more that the brain seems to be more of a radio that tunes into a frequency than it is the construction of consciousness itself.
So what do you think you're doing when you're taking these psychedelics? You think that you're changing the frequency?
I think you're just turning the dial on the radio just a little bit and accessing a different spectrum.
But that kind of implies that your normal sober state of consciousness, the whatever frequency that is in, that's kind of in a self-contained frequency. But when you change the frequency through psychedelics, you enter into a frequency that is shared amongst you and other things, like other people, including the lamp.
Yeah, yeah, and it's also I think it's part of evolution, as far as survival, because there's no way you'd be able to, go to work, let alone survive life, if you were always, basically hallucinating, is for the lack of a better word. If you were always experiencing something like DMT, there's no way you'd be able to do anything that would sustain, you know, the survival mechanism for your species. That there's only so much the brain can do and process at any given point, and so we kind of are stuck in this lower mind state for the sake of breeding.
Almost kind of like focusing, um, almost like
Kind of like a scope. Like you have a sniper rifle and shoot an animal 2 miles away, but you're not going to be able to see anything else around you. Yeah, and I've had, quite a few other crazy experiences. I've had open-eyed trips on DMT where an alien came out of my ceiling fan and he said to me, or I hate to say he but it said to me, hey, because the more I've done DMT, the crazier it's gotten, and it's almost like it allows you to go deeper. And it said, hey, check out this trick. Hold up your hands. And I held up my hands, and I had an extra finger on each hand. And I could use them each independently. And so I had all these extra fingers I could use. And I've struggled with depression my whole life. And it was not too many weeks after that, I'd actually gotten arrested. My wife was worried, and she called the police because she was afraid I was going to hurt myself. And of course, police don't do harm reduction; they just arrest you. I didn't get any charges or anything, but when they were booking me, I remember the lady saying, "All right, don't try and hold your hand up. Let me do this," which is pretty hard to, let someone just move your arms around. And she kept getting this error, and she's like, what's wrong with this thing? I've never seen this. And then the error on the fingerprint machine said too many fingers. And that
what?
Yeah, I was like, no fucking way.
So I'm kind of curious. We've talked about DXM, we've talked about psilocybin, and then we've talked about DMT. Could you describe the differences between those experiences, or those general experiences?
Psilocybin and DXM are like smoking weed compared to DMT would be the crack equivalent versus those other two drugs. DMT, there is just no. The only comparison I would say is that DMT is not inebriating as much as it is. To me, it's like DMT is getting sober. That there is taking off all the blinders. DMT to me does not feel like a drug. The experience is not drug-like. I've never been more clear and of thought and focused on DMT. To me, that when you do DMT, it's not you that changes, it's the world. It's a filtering of the senses that they're just kind of, they're shifted and amplified. The whole spectrum is widened. It's like going from dial up to broadband internet. The faucet of consciousness, it's a little trickle. It's just been turned into a full blast. The first thoughts that go through my mind when I first did DMT was, oh shit, I've really done it this time. Like there's no going back from this. I really fucked up now. And then it's, oh shit, like I've been here. This is normal. Like I'm home. Like it feels like finally gone home after being gone for years. You're finally like walking back in the front door of where you belong. I really don't even do mushrooms because they're just a tease. I mean, they're after doing DMT, psilocybin is not really worth the body load and physical effects for the little bit of mental effects that I get from it.
Did psychedelics validate your sense of not feeling a part of this world?
No, it actually kind of pulled me out of the shadows.
What are these shadows you're referring to?
Not like the shadows. It's kind of like a putting you into the know. You know, it's kind of like a hint of like, hey, like, yeah, you've always believed in magic, and it's real. Like there's more than meets the eye, and uh, this material world and this physical world is there's far beyond of the physical world. And quantum, as I got older and research, quantum physics, proves that nothing is truly solid. Psychedelics were definitely when I noticed that strange things could happen on just with something that you put in your body. That just made it propelled me into wanting to understand more and more and more. It kind of to like Daniel Pinchbeck, one of his books I have, it literally broke open my head. It validated to me that the typical just physical world, it was not all there was to it. Kind of like the Matrix, just to go to a cliche, it's a good cliche, but it just to go to that there's more behind the scenes than the majority of people walking around would ever be willing to admit.
How is this view different from the view that you held when you were a little kid?
It made it. I felt less alone. Because once I saw that there was more to this reality, that it wasn't just in my head, and that there were other people, who thought the same way. I was no longer completely alone in this world.
This episode was produced by me, Philip Johnson. All songs used can be found in the description section of this episode. If you liked what you heard today, please subscribe. Also, rate and leave a review on iTunes. It goes a really, really long way. If you'd like to become a patron of Psychotropic, or if you'd like to check out some Psychotropic related swag, or if you have a story to share, you can do all of this at psychotropicpodcast.com. If you're interested in getting a better idea about upcoming episodes, be sure to follow Psychotropic on Instagram at Psychotropic Podcast, all one word. Thanks again for listening, everybody. See you next time.